input or the questions. So that's how we're doing this. So if you want to say hello to, and also if you'd like to see someone on, if you see somebody on the screen that you'd like to send a personal message to, you have the ability to click on where it says everyone, and change it to one of the participants. So you can send a private message, and you can send a private message to me if you'd like. If you want to be anonymous with a question, that's fine. And you can just click my name, and I'll be the one to see a message, or you want to see a message to, you want to send a message to Garrett, or you want to send a message to anybody else, you can do that too. So have fun with that, and we'll keep a watch on. How's that, David?
Great, thank you so much. A good explanation. Yeah, and again, we're pretty much all amateurs at this right now, so appreciate your patience. Okay, well, I'll try to keep an eye on the participants wanting to come in. Just had 3 more. There's a little lag time, so when I hit admit, it doesn't always show up right away, so I want to be sure I'm getting everybody. All right, we got around about 49 participants at the moment. And let me just turn this to Marcia. And Marcia, say something, please. So I know you're unmuted.
Welcome all.
Hey. Would you like to open this with a prayer?
I would indeed. Let us pray. O gracious and loving God, we ask for your blessing and guidance as we gather together in this alternative way at a time that our concern is for the well-being of all in the midst of this devastating virus. We pray for wisdom for our meeting as we share our work and findings from our congregational survey and invite others to respond. May we proceed with a spirit of openness, joy, and thanksgiving. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Very nice. Apropos. Okay. So what we're going to do today is discuss a little bit what the transition team has been up to, basically what I'm calling our initial findings, tell you what we've done, what we've learned so far, and most importantly, give you, the participants, an opportunity to ask questions, make comments, and it's pretty open-ended there. And as Reed explained, we'll ask you to use the chat function, and I have started to record this, so all this, at least from a little before Marcia's prayer, we'll start to record. And we'll post a link to where you can listen and watch this at a later time if you need to go back. And also those who can't join us will be able to do that. And I'm just making sure nobody's waiting on us. Yeah, good. Okay. That's pretty much what we're up to. I'm going to share my screen and do a little PowerPoint to lead us through some of the basic information. Okay. So although this is congregational survey, we'll be discussing more than that, although that was certainly one of our bigger tasks to date. Yeah, what's that working? Okay, here we go, sorry. So the transition team was formed under the authority of the session, and members are Marcia Buell, Leslie Deach, Fran Holmes, Debbie Izat, Chris Lamondola, Betsy Mitchell, Roberta Nicholson, Ellie Seib, Reed Stevens, and myself. I just use this opportunity to say, at any point during our work, if you have some concern or question or thoughts, suggestions, you feel free to contact any one of us. We'll be glad to take what you have to say and roll that into all the other things we've been hearing and learning. So the transition process, just because there's been a little confusion about who searches for the pastor and what the transition team does and all that. So Tom has informed the session that he plans to retire at the end of June 2021. Prior to seeking Tom's successor, the presbytery has directed us, as they would any congregation, to conduct a mission study, and they've provided guidance on what that should amount to, what we need to be doing. When the mission study is completed, and I'll talk about that more in a minute, what's in the mission study. Excuse me. When it's approved by the session and the Presbytery's Committee on Ministry, then the mission study report will be used by the pastor nominating committee in their search. And we have been and will be still gathering information. Tonight's gathering is part of that, and asking what your concerns as members, what your ideas, concerns, and aspirations are for Westminster. The pastor nominating committee will actually do the search for Tom's successor. They have been chosen and unofficially given the go-ahead by session. Ultimately, we'll have to have a congregational meeting to officially let them be in effect, but they're basically beginning work now. And Mark Hall is and Lavera Johnson are co-chairs of the function, the PNC. The pastoral call process, let me just read this. So it's the process by which we determine who God is calling to be our pastor, and is led by a three-way partnership of the presbytery, the incoming pastor, and the congregation. This partnership is acted out throughout the pastoral call process, with the presbytery having primary responsibility for oversight. The transition team, who's running this meeting and whose work we'll be talking about, is charged with leading and completing a mission study of who we are and who we want to be as we prepare for the new pastoral leadership. The mission study is very much a process developed and owned by the congregation. So a little bit of timeline, and you can see there's two bars here. The upper one is the transition team, and the lower one is the pastor nominating committee, or PNC. So the time frames are a little bit off now, in that we were hoping to have a mission study report to the session by the end of this month. Instead, it will be in June. The idea being that as soon as the study is approved, then the pastor nominating committee could take that and run. But they could well need a year or more to complete the process of selecting and getting a new pastor on board. So basically, when the mission study is done, the transition team will let the pastoral nominating committee pick up. In the interim between now and, say, next winter, the transition team doesn't have a lot to do except to serve as a resource, perhaps, for the pastor nominating committee. Come winter, then we would begin planning, assisting Tom with his transition as our pastor to his retirement, and that would include planning a final service and some other recognition and so on, celebration of Tom's long time with us. And we would also then assist with the new Tom successor first installation and first service, and the PNC. So we have some overlap there, but different functions. Okay, one of the first things we did in terms of the mission study process is to look at the demographics of both our neighborhoods that surround the church and also of the congregation. We have a bunch of information really kind of truncating it here, but coming down, just summarizing probably the most salient points. One is that the zip codes around us, which go east of Main Street and over to Niagara River, is very diverse. Economically, socially, there's significant need in these neighborhoods. based on census data, area growth projections are low. That may vary neighborhood by neighborhood. Maybe Elmwood goes up, but that's the official projection using census data. And we also, this is a study done by the Percept Group, which is contracted with the Presbyterian, does work for, I think, probably other presbyteries around the country. They look at indications of religious belief and a whole bunch of other things, which we'll talk about more when we get to the, that will be discussed more in the mission study. So it says most residents are set in religious beliefs. And the other most salient point is that our congregation does not look a lot like the neighborhoods around us, except for, between Delaware and Elmwood, perhaps. So where are our members? We have 520 households, and the yellow-orange circle here encompasses most of those, but you can see we have significant numbers of households in 14226, which is Snyder, Eggertsville, 53 in Williamsville, and several in Clarence and Orchard Park, East Aurora. But what that tells us, although we're many people in the city, there's many households outside the city. So really means we're a regional congregation. We're just not a neighborhood church. That should be no surprise to anybody. 43%, 44% live within the zip codes around the church, and an equivalent amount are distributed throughout New York. We have, by our official rolls, 520 households, 826 members. Almost 2% are actually outside the region, and 11% are out of state. And church membership and all that is a whole nother subject we won't get into much depth tonight, but just to let you know, that's what their numbers tell us.
David, if I can interject, just mechanics here. If anybody's having trouble seeing the presentation, David's presentation, you can play with the speaker view, top right-hand, typically top right-hand corner of your screen. And if you click through speaker view, you can change the size of the size of all our little faces versus the size of David's presentation. So if anybody's having specific trouble with that, you can message me, and I can try to guide you on the chat if you're having trouble seeing anything. Sorry. Thanks.
No, that's great. Thanks, Reed. And I'm sitting here, all I see is my screen and the PowerPoint. So if I can't see any puzzled looks, or so that's great information. Okay, so membership by the numbers. We have been relatively stable over the last 5 years. We do get new members each year, and we lose some. Probably, I would say that the trend has probably been consistent in terms of about 40% male, 60% female, which is relatively even by gender. As a congregation, our population skews older. Fully half are 55 or older. Again, by the official numbers, 40% are under 45. But if you look at, this is a matter of my opinion and anecdotal evidence, I don't have hard numbers. I would say that participation by those under 45 is much less than 39%. So these are from membership reporting, and you can clearly see that you have a lot of older folks in that category. And you can see that these percentages or proportions of male and female. And well, now let's talk about the survey a little bit. And let me just check a note here. Be sure I haven't left out anything I needed to say. So we had 100, we mailed out or emailed out over 900 invitations to take the survey. And we know that a bunch of these folks are not necessarily active members, needless to say. But we had 174 responses. most of whom identified themselves as members or non-members with strong ties. And most of those attend service at least once a month. And similar breakdown, male, female, as we have for our population in the congregation. Who we are at home, we have, again, this is out of the 174, about 44 live alone. The biggest chunk are couples without children at home, most likely couples whose children are grown and out of the house. If you look at couples with children at home and single parent families, it's 24. So we look at this not for one thing to say, well, how representative of the congregation perhaps are the survey responses. That's just one bit of information to inform here. And we have several people living with unrelated people or in some sort of independent or assisted living. 2% of the respondents said they use childcare during worship. Only 3 respondents. 68% said they don't need it. And okay, so here we are at the survey actual results. So the first 2 questions are what we call big picture, which is what brought you to Westminster and what keeps you at Westminster. And I did not say at the start of this that we were scheduled for about 45 minutes to an hour, and we can go longer. And I can see that we've already used up 20 minutes. So let me try to get through this as fast as I can. So clearly music program, quality of preaching, the minister, social mission and action, reputation, all were important factors to people. And for what keeps people, basically everything has become more important, except perhaps child and youth programs, which I think is a factor of aging families. So music, preaching, social mission, worship style, minister, friends who attend, all big factors for what keeps people at Westminster.
Or David, as you said, it's a factor of who answered the survey. A higher percentage of older members answered the survey, so maybe the youth programs were underrepresented in the survey itself. Is that what, I think that's what we said earlier.
Yeah, although I did, thanks, yeah, it's good clarification. I did look at some of these things, and you can, SurveyMonkey, the tool, will let you see how things are across age groups. And for most of these categories, it's pretty similar. Music's important to young people, middle-aged people, older people. Preaching is likewise. It may vary a little bit in order, but it's still, it doesn't change drastically. So the survey covered worship, education, mission, organization and operations, generosity, finances, identity, values, vision, participation, and the dreams, hopes, and wishes. Now, we've got a ton of stuff, and there's no way I can cover all this tonight, but we will make basically all the reports available to the congregation. Not sure just how, when, but it will be soon, and we can make that available over the Google Drive that anybody can access. So we got a lot of comments, like in the dreams, hopes, wishes, vision. And we also spoke to a number of people with a little more one-on-one open-ended questions. But here's this gives you a general idea of, I think, what's on the minds of the people that responded to the survey. I think I'll just go read a bunch of this. Spirituality is heart, love, and acceptance, and I received that at Westminster. Early childhood program is one of the best in the region, yet seems separate from the life of the church. Congregation needs to find better ways to engage families. We've been thought, the community has thought of us as a leadership church. I value the church's music program, superb preaching, activism, intellectual stimulation. And of course, there's always a variation when you have a lot of people. He says, while the music program is excellent, I'd like to see less emphasis on it. Commitment to Sunday school and youth ministry is essential. in terms of building community. We, it's a beautiful building. We do outreach. Westminster needs to remain committed to the larger community. Programs like Weedy and Fly, Bailey Green, speak to what Westminster is all about. Fellowship, although it did not score as high on some things, it's a very important factor for a smaller, let's say, a plurality of the respondents, I'd say. And there's some, I think, more, not just fellowship generally, but more looking at how do we use fellowship to build community within the congregation, to engage people, newer members, and so on. Leadership. I would say one of the things that came out was a feeling of, on a significant number of respondents, not everybody, is they want to know more about how decisions are made, especially about finances. We'll talk about that briefly here during the night. Some people had ideas about what type of leadership and whether we need to be innovating more. All right, that's what we had in the survey there. And as I said, there's a ton more, but I think it's time to hear from you. And if you have specific questions that relate to the survey, I can probably address those, tell you what we found in there rather than going through the whole thing. Okay, Reed, have we got any comments in the chat room here?
Actually, some pleasantries, but nothing. No incisive questions that I'm used to in the Westminster community.
Well, I'll throw it out to our participants. If there's something you would like to hear more about, go ahead and type something in, and then it can go to everybody. It can go to Reed. That's not critical there.
David?
Yeah.
David?
Yes, Betsy.
Did we want to ask a sampling from this group of how many of them filled out the survey? So their thoughts are included in there. I think it'd be interesting to know if their thoughts are included in there or they had other thoughts on top of.
Well, I don't know if I want 51 people to say yes or no, but I would say.
Can we do that raise the hand thing? Reed, how do we do that?
You can reactions. You can do a thumbs up. If you go to the bottom of this is a good little exercise for those people with their video camera on. On the bottom, couple rows over from chat, you can thumbs up or you can wave. You thumbs up and then there's okay. I see a couple thumbs up. There we go. Yeah, so okay, good for you guys. All right, look at that. Toggle over. Yeah. So we got a lot of surveyors. I should survey myself, right? I did it, of course. A good question here. A couple of questions are coming in. Were there any comments from Cameron? Were there any comments about the interfaith leadership in the city?
Yeah, there were some, and I actually was. There were some very specific questions, and saying they're in favor of more interfaith activities. When Debbie and I first got here, we were involved with Mitzvah Day, and it was a big deal, and it was very successful for a few years, and then it was time for it had kind of lived out its life, I think. But so I was a little surprised to not see more along those lines, but there's definitely interest in that, and I would say more generally there were comments about cooperating or doing programs with other organizations more broadly. Not specifically interfaith, and not to exclude other congregations, but just other organizations.
Also comments on involvement with the presbytery. Weren't there, David?
Yeah, I'm not thinking of what those were. So if you
Okay.
if you have a specific thought in
I just
mind.
think there were some comments about the Westminster stepping up to our diligence towards addressing the participating in the presbytery. More questions. How do you anticipate having the PNC use this data? Are you giving them more of the nuance, are you giving them more nuanced specific data?
Yeah, and the transition team has talked about making all the survey data available. And the mission study, of course, I think we're looking at maybe a 20-page document or something like that. So it's really the big ideas that we would incorporate as much of the specifics as we can. But there's a lot of very specific comments, suggestions for new direction or improvements, and many comments supporting the good things that already are at Westminster. I think that probably is the vast majority of comments. But yeah, the PNC will basically have access to all the information that we've gathered. There are, I think, maybe 4 or 5 big questions in the survey that had narrative answers, where we've got 100, 200 comments. There's a lot of common ideas, but there's also, diverging ideas. And we've started to go through and kind of categorize and, put a little bit of organization on that. Say, oh, well, these people, like, I was going through the education comments today, and there's a bunch of comments like, but I like all these things and they're happening at once, and I'm, it's frustrating, and I can't go to all these. A lot of people about making some comment along those lines. So we'll do that and try to organize this a little bit to make it a little easier for the PNC to pick up on it, not have to wade through it all themselves. But long story short, they will have all the information that we have.
One question was, if people have not filled out the survey, can we still get data in?
Yes, and I would say it probably won't impact the statistics too much in terms of percent support for this or that, but that's not a problem. It will be just that much more complete. But the narrative responses, each of those basically are individuals, and they stand alone, and they'll be part of the whole record. So it's fine to go ahead and send that in. At some point, we're not going to be able to look at stuff. It's like you get to the final draft, we're not going to be adding a whole lot of new stuff. So I would just encourage sooner's better.
And the laws of statistics would say that statistically it won't shift the curve significantly if it is included or isn't, but your individual comments are very valued and important.
Absolutely.
Reed Taylor, thank you, Reed. Always nice to see another Reed on the swamp. Islam series improved by faith by moving from the parish hall to the larger community participation. So just I think a comment, Reed, from thank you for that comment of making that interfaith, making more interfaith accessible, I think is what I read that as. Question about the communication problem, challenges with the church, and particularly from leadership to the congregation. In this, we're a very top level question, a very top level review that David's done, and I think the question is sort of more penetrating in terms of what are some of the issues that are shown that are coming up that we're seeing from the survey and from the responses. David, can you comment on issues about communication from leadership to the congregation?
Yeah, for sure. There were concerns about that and a desire on part of several respondents for more openness, more communication, and not just from leadership, but from session committees, communication between committees, communications from committees to the congregation. So it certainly applies to Tom, but applies to the session as well. Let me just, if I can take a moment, I have some notes here and I just want to scan through them to see if there's something that I had pointed out.
While we're doing that, I could throw a question out to the rest of our committee.
Go ahead, please.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
if sorry, someone was asking that they don't remember receiving the survey. Can I pick one up at the church? So we made an effort to make both paper copy, the ability to fill out a paper copy, as well as, and there were a number of people who requested paper. We used the list of people that wanted paper programs, hard copy programs each week, and we used that list and sent them by mail, snail mail. We sent them hard copies. So there is a link. How would someone find the link to the survey? It was sent out. I found mine through searching my email inbox.
Reed, this is Fran, and I was in charge of sending any out for anyone who needed it, and I can continue to do that if I get the names.
Great. Gail Donaldson asked if she could get one sent out to you. And Gail, if you let us know if we can send one via email, we will send you a link for that. Erwin, thank you. What does the presbytery do with the information? Marcia, I think that's a good question for you. What does the presbytery do with all this information?
Essentially, what the presbytery does is receive our final draft of our mission study. And then the Committee on Ministry, which is a body of about 14 clergy and representatives from churches, reviews it to see if it is inclusive of all the components they believe are essential to present to candidates. They want to ensure that it is, from their perspective, an adequate representation of our church. They are particular about wording because they don't want congregations saying things like, oh, we want an energetic young family man, or they don't want comments that suggest we want a dynamic pastor who's going to build our congregation in numbers and energy. So they want to ensure that the church is taking responsibility for its own future, but adequately describes what they're looking for in a pastor.
Excellent. Thank you.
Reed, I could follow up on that question about communication.
Thank you.
And I would say in the survey, it came out a little bit in some of the multiple choice, strongly agree, disagree kind of questions. More so in some of the narratives in terms of the ones at the end of the survey, which are, kind of your hopes, dreams, wishes, or what would allow you to be more committed, and there was just kind of a catch-all, anything else you want to know. So that was there. I would say that in the survey, there was one specific question that said, I am well informed about various church committees, activities, and governance. And although 77% said they either agree or strongly agree, about 15% said they disagree, or a few strongly disagree. And 8% said they don't know. So there's about 20+% who either don't think so or don't know. So that was a little more disagreement than we got for a lot of the other things, like the value of what people are getting from worship and how they regard all that. So I think as far as communication goes, it's mostly in the narrative comments, and all that it will be available, and certainly as we do the mission study report, that those factors will be brought out.
Very good. One other question. Thank you, Claire. Is there anything we can do about having only 20% of the congregation responding to the survey? Any way to get feedback from non-participants?
And I can see that's actually Mark Hall. Good question, Mark. I mentioned at the beginning that the official numbers are we have 820 members, I think 826. And I think, let me put it that way, and this is not unique to Westminster, but it is, I think, an issue is that our membership rolls overstate to, I will say, a significant degree, how many people are actually involved with Westminster at some point, some significance during the year. I don't know what the number is. It's not 800. I'll bet you $1 on that. I don't know if it's 250, 300, 400, 450 somewhere, but I bet it's closer to 400 or 500 at most. Still, that does say that, we don't have every person in the congregation responding to a survey. On the other hand, from what I've heard and read about surveys is that we actually have a pretty high response rate. I think that the bigger question may be perhaps there were some people that missed the notice, didn't get the survey for whatever reason, bad communication or whatever. But there may be 200 people who were aware and didn't care enough or were ambivalent enough perhaps about all this. I don't know what to conclude about that. But there's a theme elsewhere in all this that there's a lot of committed members, the people who do show up every week or most weeks and, serve on committees and serve as deacons and elders and do a lot of things around the church. But there's a fair number of people who, they come to church and that's good. That's all they need. And that's all you ever hear from them. I'm not judging. I'm just saying that seems to be what is. And I don't think that's unusual. This is speaking strictly for myself here. I'm not speaking for the committee, but having looked at a lot of this stuff, one of the things that did come up in a number of places is to what degree are members really engaged? And that comes up in the comments and some of the statistics we know about in terms of who pledges in the annual generosity campaign. And are we meeting people's needs? Are we energizing them enough to the point where they are compelled to be more engaged, to be more active? That's an open question right now, but I think there's something to be said about that in the mission study. And I suspect that's no different than most churches and most organizations.
As another metric, Cameron points out that about 200 households have pledged to the 2020 giving. So that's 250 households. So we're actually hitting a pretty high proportion of that compared to that number. So that's about 70%, which is pretty good. I'm jumping around the message, so if I've skipped over your message, don't worry, I will come back to it. Your question. Good question. And for clarification, because maybe we didn't present this, Scott's asked, is the survey the sole method of completing the mission study?
No.
Yeah.
So good question. That according to the presbytery, I'm looking for my document. We have an outline that we were asked to follow, and that the survey is a big part of it, put it that way, and it gives us a lot of very specific information. And I think we did a pretty good job as we look at how people responded. We said, well, we could have asked that question differently, or we could have asked some other question. But I think it has given us a lot of useful information. Another thing that the presbytery had us do is what they call a community study, which is basically carry out one-on-one conversations between a member of the transition team and people who we would consider leaders, and that'd be people who are leaders within the congregation. And also we spoke with people who are leaders of organizations in the wider community. For instance, I spoke with Rabbi Fryrick of Temple Beth Zion to get his perspective on our relationship and how he sees Westminster within Buffalo and so on. We did that with some other organizations. And of course, some of the people we spoke with in the congregation who've exhibited leadership as members are also very active in the wider community in Buffalo. So I think we've met the Presbytery's objective there. So several of the quotes that I had in the PowerPoint up front, some of the general comments came from some of those conversations. So those were just opportunities to be more in-depth and more open-ended than perhaps you could get from, either certainly from a multiple choice question or even a narrative written answer. So those are the main tools: the demographics, looking at who we are, who the congregation is, who the neighborhood is, conducting the survey, getting a lot of very specific information about attitudes and concerns, and then more in-depth conversations. That, and then putting all that together with a team of, I think, very committed people on the transition team with a lot of experience, life experience, a lot of time, very active in Westminster. I think we're pretty well set to take all this vast amount of information and put it forth for the PNC to use with some. We're not in the, if there's problems and suggestions for improvements that have been identified in this, and we're not in a position to go and fix everything or even to say what needs to happen. I wouldn't go too much past the point of, well, this, for instance, if a third of the congregation says they don't know very much about the budget process, I don't know, I forget the number, but I said, well, maybe some effort needs to be made to do a better job of information, but we're not going to say the session's fallen down on the job here, they need to do this or that. That's not our business.
Thank you. Jim asked a question. I think this might have been, David, you'll be familiar with a quote from, maybe there's a quote that says, people are staying for the preaching, but less for the preacher. And Jim wasn't sure how to interpret that. Was that a comment in our data?
If you look at the big picture question, and there's a couple other survey questions that kind of get at the similar thing, the same question from a different perspective. But yeah, there was, the survey differentiated in terms of what brought you and what keeps you between the preaching and the minister. And the preaching, I think, in that little bar chart, respondents responded favorably, very highly for the preacher, but even more so for the preaching. I'll let people draw their own conclusions.
Okay, it's just a scoring. So it was basically two bars next to each other, and the preaching, the preaching scored higher than the preacher.
Yeah.
There's Reed Taylor. Thank you. Just clarifying my question on his comment. Reed's comment was in response to a survey results comments limiting the effectiveness of the adult programs to the case, and other comments wishing that as we did more with other faith groups, and Reed reminding us all that how impressive the numbers were when we moved the Muslim-Jewish conversations to the parish hall, and we had such great turnouts. So just venue is important. I think is and the importance of, and I'm sure I know that how important it is to read, and the rest of us, the interfaith conversations. One of our I think it's a signature event, or has been in our past, a role Westminster has played. I thank you, Mary. Good question. Does the committee feel they've received enough information to have an adequate vision for what to recommend as the mission in the mission statement? Some confusion maybe around the whole word mission and the word, the title that we've been given by the Presbytery to use for the title of what we're doing.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Reed. So we talk about mission. We use the word mission in different ways, and often mission means the work that we do in the community outside the building, and it could be work we're doing, or at least involving in the community and providing some sort of service or help. In this case, the mission statement is I think a more all-encompassing. What is it that this congregation is about? And it's about worship and music, and it's about fellowship, and it's about education, and it's also about serving the wider community. So I see the term mission study as all-encompassing. And so I don't know if that's where Mary Jane's coming from there, but if that's the case, I think that we do have a lot of specific comments about mission, the mission projects that we have been doing, and perhaps directions for the future. And I think one of the things that, and we've discussed this some as a team, is one of the things that the mission, or that the survey and the conversations that we've had tell us, is that we are a strong congregation. We share a lot of common values. We value highly the music, the high quality of music, the kinds of music. We value the strong preaching, the intellectual and rigor of it, the community that we have, and then the work that we do in the outside community. I think those all come up as very strongly shared among members of the congregation. I think in terms of direction, there's a little more variation, but there's still a strong interest in continuing outside mission work and continuing our tradition of music and fine preaching. So I saw there was a question about what was the transition team most surprised about, and maybe personally, and I'll let other members speak up. I was surprised in some ways how, I wouldn't call it unanimity, but the strength of agreement about a lot of stuff. And yeah, there's diversity of opinion and divergence of, some people think we should go right, some go left, and some up, some down, but there's a lot of commonly held ideas and values. So hopefully I answered Mary Jane's question, and as well as Debbie Irwin's.
I liked the question. There's a point about transition, whether or not we're looking for thinking about whether the process will involve a transitional or interim pastor. I
don't have that information. That's a question for session. I think, so far as I understand, there's a desire on the part of the session to not need to go to the interim pastor route. And I don't know if Garrett is still with us, but I think early on in our discussions, what I understood was that the session would like to avoid that, and that there's, if we have a couple months between Tom's retirement and his successor showing up in September or August, that we would have ways of managing that without calling an interim. But I'd be happy to.
David,
yeah.
The the presbytery took the exceptional position that Westminster did not have to have an interim. So the decision of whether we would have one or not would rest with the session. But usually after a long pastorate, and Tom's will be 22 years by the time he retires, it is usually considered mandatory. And they took the position that in this climate, and certainly it was before the pandemic, to mandate an interim for large churches like Orchard Park. They have Skip Ferguson, and he is considered a transitional or bridge pastor. But they did take the position that Westminster would not have to have an interim. I expect they'll do the same thing with the Clarence Presbyterian Church. It's a different climate than it was 10 or 15 years ago, when interims were perceived to be the answer to moving through the process of accepting, you know, I don't want to say grieving necessarily, but that's part of it, but just making a transition from one pastor to another.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
I think one of the reasons we're all, I mean, just a personal motivation. I think the 9 of us on the transition committee are working really hard, and I know that the nominating, I would just assume, I'm guessing, and Lavera, you can comment on this, but I'm expecting that the nominating committee and the transition committee are all going to work really hard to avoid the need for a transitional. If we do our job and the right candidates out there, hopefully, and this is why we've been really pushing ourselves to get to move along and make this all happen. A good question. I'm sorry, it's my daughter's 19th birthday tonight, so she was asking when we can cut the cake. But there was a question of what was the transition team most surprised about, and I think that I'm gonna, if I could, David, I would like to take this one, because one of the things that I was hearing, and I've is a lot about, and this ties into another question, Sarah, thank you, about the youth and the ministry to the youth and the youth programs. And we've been getting actually interesting more feedback more recently from some of the youth. We only had 3 people under 18 reply, which was too bad. But one of the things that we're hearing a lot of is the importance of the connection of Westminster to WECP, the importance of consistent youth programs that have where their children are sharing stories with their family, bringing faith, you know, through the Sunday school into the family. Some of the comments we're seeing, and it was although the survey skewed. The survey responses skewed, you know, quite older. There was a lot of concern on the vitality. I'm not saying there was a lot of importance placed on the vitality, continuing vitality and growth of the youth programs and the missions. There are a lot of testimonials from youth and people I talked to in my surveys, my individual surveys, how it changed their lives. And the main mission work camp and many other missions. So I think that was really neat to see, and I think an important place to go forward with. Okay. What else? Anybody? What vision of for the future emerges from the survey?
Well, I think we're still processing that. And I think I don't want to say too much because I can be a little bit influenced by the last thing I looked at, but there's a lot there. I think personally, I think what comes out is keeping a lot of our tradition, the music, the preaching, our mission in the outside community. And there are various ideas where, well, I'll back up a second. Many people say we need more younger people in the congregation. and more children, and families with young children and so on. And I don't think anybody is going to argue with that. I think the difficult questions will be, how do we get there? I did have some exchange just in the last few days with a young adult, who has some really specific questions and suggestions for engaging younger people. And I think, and I know I've had conversations with Phil Stevens, who's now chairing the membership committee for the session. And I know Phil personally is extremely interested in and wants to change things for the better in terms of getting people involved when they first come into Westminster, to get people engaged. And whether they're younger or older doesn't really matter. But if a young person's interested enough to walk into Westminster and sit in the pews for a few Sundays, what's going to hold them there besides service? And that may be all some want, but I think probably most people come. Well, my suspicion, this is me talking, is most people want some sort of sense of community. And if we're not helping that happen, we're missing something. So I think there's comments to that effect. I think there's a bit of a sense of that when you sift through all the many comments. People want a younger, more vibrant congregation. Well, we have to get people in, and then we have to keep them in. So that's beyond what we're positioned to do, beyond what the PNC is going to be able to do. But I think if those are the issues that are on the table, that will help them seek and find the best person to succeed Tom, which is our main job here. The other thing is, there's so much, I think, good detail here that I would like to see each of the committees pick up on these many specific comments. The folks that are dealing with finances. Okay, what are people saying about finances and generosity campaign and so on? Membership, education, a lot of comments about education. Many positive comments, but and I have to say I feel a little bit for Caitlin and Micah, in that we're asking all these questions about how do you feel about these programs, and they've just stepped in. They're just so new to all this and trying to make their own way and make the best of things. So in fact, if you had not filled in the survey, if you had filled it in, you saw that, given the fact that our education staff is brand new in this job, keep that in mind before you make a lot of judgments. But so yeah, I think there's a lot here. I think it'll be helpful. I think the information will be useful to the PNC, and I think even more so, it's going to be useful to the session committees and the congregation as a whole, as we try to make Westminster not just survive, but thrive into the coming years.
Just I think a nice, maybe we are getting to an hour. Nice way to maybe wrap up. Roy Stewart's asking, when do we, I guess, and Roy, I want to get to your question. When do we expect to finish the final report? I think it's this conversation can make it feel like we as a committee are trying to change or not change, but to define what the mission of our church is. Really, no, we're just trying to find where are we at this point in time. We're trying to help define who we are as a community and what we're looking for in a pastor. Sort of building my daughter called it a OkCupid profile. I think it was my daughter saying, what is it? Who are we and what are we looking for in a pastor as a I guess as a mate in a way, or as a leader. We're dividing a resume of who we are so that we can find the right person to match with us. So we're not trying to steer the church. We're trying to collect information on who we are and what we aspire our community to be. if that's just, again, I'm sorry, David, that's me talking, but the
No,
question
no.
was,
Good.
yes, Carol, the chat comments be able to save recorded in this meeting? Yes, I think the chat is part of the
Yeah.
part of the record. And then Roy again is asking, when do we think we're going to finish the final report?
Well, we, and I indicated to the session last month, we had initially hoped to give a report to the session for their review and approval in May. That's not going to happen, but I think we will have, I don't see anything to get in the way of having a draft that we can put together and give to the session in advance of their meeting so that they can comment and we can adjust this so that we can get them, get everybody comfortable to approve it at the end of, at their June meeting. So that's, I think that's doable. And I don't see anything getting in the way of that. And just in terms of the whole process, that once the session has approved it, we would turn around and provide that to protect the Presbytery Committee on Ministry. And they would actually, their next meeting after the June session meeting would be July 7th. Assuming we satisfy their concerns, we would then have a final report there in early July. I would like to pick up on some of the chat I see, and Sarah has asked a question that says, what kind of information would be good to obtain from our youth, those under 18? And a few people said, yeah, that's a great question. I agree. Let me read Carol Greetham's response to that. She says, excellent questions from Sarah. The future direction of the church should take into account those who will be in the congregation in 10 or 20 years from now, but this age group didn't have many participants in the survey. How can we get better feedback from this youth, from the youth and millennials too? And that is a question. We don't have that answer. We have a meeting tomorrow night of the transition team, and I might just put that on the agenda. What do we think? Is there something we need to do in this mission study, something we can do in the near term to get that? I can applaud Micah and Caitlin. They encouraged me and got me to send the meeting invitation to this meeting to folks in the youth group. But that's kind of last minute, and you know, theoretically everybody's known about this, but that doesn't mean everybody really got the word. But yes, it's a good question. How can we get better feedback from youth and millennials, the younger adults in the congregation? We got a little bit. I'd like to see more as well. And yeah, Kimberly says the youth are the future of this church, and I can't argue with that. Wish I had more. I wish we had more information.
Well, and if anybody has suggestions for us, and particularly Caitlin and Micah, but if anybody has suggestions about how we, you know, how we could, and Kimberly, thank you, you know, is asking, could we have a survey, youth specific survey, and you know, we can let's talk about that.
Yeah. Yeah. And Caitlin says, you know, getting youth and millennials invited to serve on the committees. We did try to get some younger people, and that was not I wouldn't say youth per se, but for the transition team. But and I can't speak about the PNC because the Westminster nominating committee had that job, and I don't know what discussions they had. I know that they did try to get some younger people with young children, but the time requirements for the PNC especially can be pretty onerous, and a lot of people couldn't make, the people they spoke to were not prepared to make that kind of commitment along with the rest of their lives. So
But I like Cerie's idea about we could have we could moderate a Zoom meeting with youth, and get, you know, one way to get sort of instant feedback in this type of format, certainly format that they're better at than we are. So Very good.
All right, we're about an hour and almost 10 minutes in here. And we can keep going. I don't want to shut anything down here. If there are other open-ended questions, and again, after this meeting, it's recording. I'll get a link, and we can put that in the e-news. And if anybody's got a question, they can contact any one of us directly, and we'll get answers to your questions. And what was the other thing? I just distracted myself here. Yeah, so we'll look at this if you have ideas for engaging folks. Yeah, if you have ideas for engaging young people here, let us know. And
Yeah, Caitlin's idea is pretty strong.
Yeah, just to barge into, to borrow one of their youth group sessions. I think that's a great idea.
All right, Caitlin, I'll talk to you tomorrow. And Micah.
Great. It's great you all attended tonight. Do we have
let's see. All right. Any other questions here? Looks like, I guess we've, Google Youth Hang. Okay.
I didn't hear any response to the comment that I made about the faces on the screen and the faces in the montage that we saw at worship on Easter.
Sorry, Reed.
I just thought that was an interesting comparison, because a big question on the floor was, how involved are the people in this church, and who are they, and how many, and so on. And there are a lot of faces that we saw in that montage that we're not seeing tonight, and vice versa. And we are the church, and they are the church. And that was a marvelous recording of Westminster at its people best, if I may put it that way. So anyway, that's why I wrote the comment, and nobody commented on it. I think you passed over it, Reed.
Sorry, Reed. I was looking for the, yes. Thank you for the comment. I appreciate always your insights. But I don't remember seeing that. I think I was late for that. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I'm sorry I missed it too. So, but good point, Caitlin. Let's talk tomorrow. And I don't know. This is in normal times. This would be a holiday weekend, and people will be leaving and going all kinds of places. I don't know when your next hangout is scheduled, but well.
Yeah, just call me.
Okay, sounds good.
Right.
We'll do, and we'll redouble our efforts to get younger folks involved here.
Is there a closing prayer?
I have it.
All
right,
Marsh is ready.
I'm ready.
If we're all ready, we'll have
Okay, let us pray. O God of goodness and grace, we give thanks for the energy, intelligence, imagination, and love that we have amongst us in our congregation. As we go out from this meeting, let us be mindful of our care for all God's children and this beautiful earth. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you everybody for taking the time and digging in and learning about this and thinking about it and giving us your ideas. And again, we are open for business still, so you know how to get a hold of us, I hope. And we'll continue on. And all righty. Sounds like we're about done. Thank you all. Have a great
Happy
night.
birthday to Joe.
Yeah.
19 transition team during COVID-19.